So they found a death camp in Mexico, and the death camp, well, it was filled with burned human bones. They found skulls. They found literally hundreds upon hundreds of skeletal remains, burned human skulls, other parts of the human skeleton. They found also a pile of shoes. A pile of shoes. They found around 200 shoes. And to make this even more horrifying than it already is, they found underground ovens that they were using to burn the bodies. So you got ovens, burned human skeletons, a pile of shoes. I mean, this is like Auschwitz. And they found this in Mexico. They found this death camp in Mexico. And they found this death camp in a small town called La Estanzuela. And La Estanzuela is outside of the city of Guadalajara, the capital city of Jalisco. And who was running this death camp? Well, it is believed that it was the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which is one of the big major cartels in Mexico. And they're violent, they're criminals, they're mass murderers, they're just demonic people. And the reason why it is believed that it was this cartel that was running this death camp is because that area of La Estanzuela is dominated by the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Now, who were these people? Who were the victims? Because people will say, well, you know, it's probably just the cartel killing rival cartel members, or it's the cartel killing traitors or snitches. That's not what I'm reading here. There was an article about this death camp published by the Washington Post, and this article tells us that what happened was people were being led to this camp under false pretenses. So they were told, hey, you're really desperate for work. You're really poor. You want a job? Well, come to La Estanzuela and we will get you a job. We'll get you work. And so all these poor, desperate people would come to La Estanzuela. And they would be told, hey, we didn't invite you here to help you get a job. We invited you here to force you to train to be fighters for our cartel. So they would force these poor people to undergo paramilitary training. And if they weren't good in the training, if they weren't athletic enough, if they weren't good enough for the training, they would just kill them. Or perhaps they wouldn't follow orders. Perhaps they wouldn't acquiesce to the demands of the cartel. They would just kill them. They would kill them, murder these poor people, chop their bodies into pieces, and then burn the body parts. And that's why when they discovered the camp, they found skulls and other skeletal remains because, well, they were killing all these people. And then they would burn their bodies in these underground ovens. And they would force some of these people to pile up stones and bricks to make these underground ovens. And it's just horrifying. And this is not the only camp of this nature that's been discovered. They have found numerous of these death camps in Mexico. This is what the article published by the Washington Post says. Numerous of these camps have been found in Mexico. And the people who discovered that this place was being used as a death camp were not even members of Mexican law enforcement. They were not federales. These were just volunteers. They're part of a volunteer group that's working to expose the cartel. And a lot of these people join this volunteer group because they have missing relatives and they want to know what happened to their relatives. They want to know perhaps if their relatives are buried somewhere. And so they go out with this group to perhaps to find bodies with the hopes that maybe they can find their relatives. And so these volunteers who are working to expose the cartels, they found the camp. It wasn't even the law enforcement agents. And the thing is that before these volunteers discovered that this place was being used as a death camp, And by the way, this place is technically a ranch. But before these volunteers discovered that this ranch was being used as a death camp, law enforcement had already combed through that place. They went through this place. They arrested 10 criminals. They rescued, I believe, 2 people who were held in captivity in this camp. But they didn't find the ovens. They didn't find, or perhaps they did. Perhaps they just didn't talk about it. But they didn't talk about finding a pile of shoes. They found around 200 or so shoes in this camp. And this camp was discovered in the Guadalajara area. Guadalajara is the capital city of Jalisco, and I lived in Jalisco. I lived in Jalisco for over a year, around a year and 3 months. And I visited Guadalajara several times. It's a dump. It's just a big dump. It's a ginormous city. It's huge. It's one of the biggest cities on earth. It's a ginormous city, but it is a smog-infested, crime-ridden city. It's filled with criminals. It's filled with miserable, desperate people. I mean, you go to Guadalajara, you walk the streets, and this is what I saw when I was there. I saw people singing for money. It was just a lot of desperation, a lot of poverty, a lot of weird stuff. A lot of weird nightclubs. It's like something out of the Matrix. And it's just a very dark city. Very dark city. And they even have a song dedicated to the city of Guadalajara. Guadalajara, Guadalajara. It's a dump. It's a demonic city. You feel evil when you go to Guadalajara. You do. And every time I visited Guadalajara, I always dreaded it. It is, if you are a claustrophobic person, never go to Guadalajara. It's filled with people, packed full of buildings, packed full of really garbage-looking infrastructure. And then you see these random nightclubs. You'll be walking down the road. You'll be walking past these buildings, and then you'll see an open door, and you walk past it, and you just see this corridor, and then at the end of the corridor, you see all these sort of disco lights flashing against the wall, and just super loud music. You'll see stuff like this, and you're wondering, like, what abominations are going on in there? I don't know. It's just a weird place. And then I remember I was walking through downtown Guadalajara one night, and I saw a group of Mexican dudes, just covered in piercings, just totally satanic looking, like just goth, right? Just pure goth looking guys. This was weird, just a bunch of weirdos. And they had this giant sign up in Spanish, and it said something like anarquista, something like calling for anarchy. So these were Mexican anarchists. And I'm thinking, you live in Mexico, one of the most lawless countries in the world. There's already anarchy. You already have anarchy. There's already enough anarchy. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And this was back in around 2005 or 2006 that I was there. And it wasn't as bad as it is now. It wasn't. It was not as bad as it is now. At least when I was over there, I could walk through Guadalajara at night and nothing ever happened to me. Now, there were a lot of weirdos, weird goth-looking people, cross-dressers, weird-looking nightclubs. Just a weird place, right? It's like a giant San Francisco. But it's much worse now. Much worse than it was back in 05, 06. So I guess those anarchists got what they wanted. Lawlessness. It's a lawless country. Mexico is one of the most corrupt countries on the face of the earth. One of the most corrupt countries on the face of the earth. Politicians get shot there all the time. It has a very high rate of people just murdering politicians. And they're murdered by cartels. And the cartels kill them because they want to do some kind of a policy against crime. So if you have a politician that comes along and says, hey, I'm going to fight crime, I'm going to pay the police more so that we can incentivize them to fight crime, you have a target on you. And there was a case, there was a case last year of a female politician, and she was saying, hey, I'm going to pay the police more, I'm going to incentivize the cops to fight crime, we're going to fight the criminals together. Dead. And it's not like they killed her in secret. They just gunned her down in public view, right there for everyone to see. They don't give a damn because they control the country. They control it. And if you're a politician who is not in line with what they want, they kill you. Now, if you're a politician who's doing what they want, you're fine. You're a tool of the criminal empire that's running Mexico. But they don't want any politicians that fight the criminals. And it is a crime-infested dump. So if you have a lenient immigration policy from Mexico, you're going to have a whole bunch of criminals. Because Mexico is a crime-infested country. And it's controlled by criminals. It's controlled by mafia. The federales, the police in Mexico, extremely corrupt. And if they weren't corrupt, then there wouldn't be all this crime. But there is. Why? Because law enforcement is corrupt, government is corrupt. It's all corrupt. And you could say, well, and this is the thing is, when you talk about the problems with Mexico, a lot of people, especially people from Mexico, they like to say things like, yeah, but the problem is government. The government is the problem. The government is a symptom of the problem. The corruption in Mexico is a symptom of the problem. The crime, the mass murders, are simply symptoms of a problem. And what's the problem, right? The problem is a sickness. Symptoms are always what? Signs of a sickness. That's what a symptom is. What's the sickness? The sickness is no Christianity, or a horrendous lack thereof. Too many people in Mexico are pagan. You literally have a ginormous cult in Mexico that worships death. Yeah. They are literally millions. And I checked the numbers. I've heard 10 million, I've heard 12 million people in Mexico worship death. You can look into this if you haven't heard of this. I'm sure most of you have heard of this at least once in your life. But there is a cult in Mexico called Santa Muerta, which literally means holy death. Santa, holy, muerta, death. Holy death. Saint death. Now we have Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas, Saint Paul, Saint Peter, right? All good. In Mexico, they will have the Catholic saints, the Orthodox saints, but they will also have Santa Muerta, Saint Death. And they will say, well, we worship Jesus, we worship Jesus, but we also revere Saint Death, because Saint Death can give us stuff that perhaps Jesus will not give us. And this is their thinking, right? I'm not saying I support this, but this is their sick, demented, deranged way of thinking. There's certain things that we want, right? Perhaps we want more money. Perhaps we want success in our criminal enterprises. Perhaps we want success in our criminal business. Well, we know that Jesus is not okay with our criminal behavior, so we're going to go to Saint Death. Saint Death is going to give us what we want. So I want money, I want luck, I want power. Saint Death. Or they go to some other saint that has absolutely nothing to do with Christianity. They go to Jesus Verde or whatever his name is. I mean, it's just, there is a religion that acts as a foundation for the criminal world of Mexico. And so Jesus Malverde, yeah, that's another saint. I had to look it up real quick. Jesus Malverde. So they'll pray to Jesus Malverde, because let's say they want to traffic drugs or something like that. So they want luck. Well, they know, you're not going to go pray to Jesus for help because Jesus hates what you're doing. So who do you pray to? Santa Muerta or Muerte, however you pronounce it, or Jesus Malverde, who is the drug trafficker's saint. Oh, you want to traffic money? You want to traffic drugs? Jesus Malverde. So there's a whole religion. And some of these cartel guys will just openly worship Satan. Yeah. I actually, before I get to that, so when you have a cult of death, and you have millions of people adhering to this cult, what do you expect? Right? You have nothing else to expect but what? Death! Death! So I'm not shocked that they have death camps in Mexico, because there's literally a cult of death in Mexico. We worship death. Okay, what are you going to get? Death! Death! And it's literally what the Bible talks about in the book of Proverbs. What does God say in the book of Proverbs? All those who hate me love death. And people in Mexico, too many people in Mexico, love death. And so what do you get as a product of that? Death. Death camps. You get death camps. It's like the Nazis. The Nazis were a cult dedicated to what? They were dedicated to social Darwinism and eugenics and might makes right, and the strong have a right to exterminate the weak, and we are the superior race, therefore we have a right to exterminate anyone that we deem inferior. It was just death. It was dedicated to what? Death. Creating death. And so what did the Nazis produce? Death camps. Not shocking. When you have a cult of death, then death is the product of that cult. And when you have a culture that is indifferent to the existence of this cult, then what you have is an atmosphere in which mass murder is done on a very wide scale and just allowed to happen with impunity. Because here is the biggest problem with Mexico. As I said, the crime and all these evil things are symptoms of a disease. And I said the disease is a lack or really a hatred of Christianity, a rejection of Christianity. And so what is a part of that? What does that come with? There's a whole full package deal when it comes to this stuff. What that entails is indifference, because no Christian society is going to tolerate the worship of death. It's just not going to happen, right? You have a worship of death and there's a cult. Well, guess what's going to happen? In a truly Christian society, the government's going to come along and say, hey, no, not going to happen. Someone's going to come along. In other words, the society is going to look down on such things. And when you have enough people in society looking down on something, peer pressure is a very, very powerful thing. It's a very powerful force. And so peer pressure for a good purpose can be used for good. And then people will say, not a good idea. People look down on that. And it's going to be suppressed just through peer pressure, just from the cultural standards of the society. The fact that you have millions of people worshiping death in Mexico is a sign of a decayed society, and it is a sign of a society that has either become indifferent towards Christianity or just plainly hates Christianity. Because no Christian society would ever accept this. No Christian society would ever have an atmosphere that is conducive for this type of cult to thrive. But the fact is that this cult is thriving in Mexico. So it's not just the fact that you have the cult, it's the fact that the cult is thriving and is almost ubiquitous in Mexican society. I'll give you guys an example. I know someone who owns a shop that sells Catholic items, right? Candles, icons, etc., rosaries. And this person told me there is not a day that goes by where someone does not enter the store asking for a Santa Muerte icon. Not a day. Not a day goes by where that doesn't happen. Someone just, every day, you have at least one person coming into the store saying, do you have Santa Muerte? A Santa Muerte icon, a Santa Muerte statue. Not a day goes by where that doesn't happen. That's a sign. And there's many other examples of this. Look at the celebration of the Aztec Empire in Mexican society. Now, this is even more ubiquitous. You wonder why they have this cult of Santa Muerte. Because what's so ubiquitous in Mexico is the admiration and the glorification of the Aztec Empire. Now, when the Spanish entered Mexico, they were faced with one of the, if not the most barbaric pre-Christian societies ever discovered. I mean, these Aztecs and the Mayans also, they made the Roman Empire with all of its barbaric gladiatorial games look quite civilized. I mean, the Roman Empire was a million times more civilized than the Aztec or the Mayan kingdoms. The Aztec Empire was extremely barbaric, and that is an understatement. It was a society where you had this dictator. In the case of the time of the Spanish invasion, you had Mr. Moctezuma, and then you had I believe his nephew, Guacamoc. Sounds like guacamole, Guacamoc. And after Moctezuma was killed, and there's a whole debate over who killed them. There are people who think that the Spanish killed them, but from what I have read, it looks like his own people killed him because they thought that he was going to betray their gods and go to the side of the Spanish. So, but regardless of what you think about, regardless of who you think actually killed them, Moctezuma was this dictator who was revered as a god. And they said he's God on the earth. And he is this physical representation, or he's of the lineage of the sun god. He's connected somehow to Tonatiuh, the sun god. And he was worshipped as a god. And the Aztec Empire had all these provinces, it had all these territories, and they would force the people that were subject to the Aztec Empire to pay taxes. Now you'll say, okay, well, everyone pays taxes. America, we pay taxes. Every year we pay taxes. What's wrong with taxes? But the thing is that they would demand taxes in human blood. And they would go to these villages and these towns that were under the Aztec Empire, and they would force people to come to their city to be sacrificed. So it's like, yeah, you got to pay taxes to the Aztec Empire. Oh, taxes in what? Corn, maize, gold? No. Human beings. So people were sacrificed. Every day sacrifices were happening. I mean, in one day, for example, 2,000 people were sacrificed. In one day. They would sacrifice 2,000 people in one day. That's impossible. No, it's not. Because they had all these platforms. It was like that scene from Dune. They had all these platforms, and they would be sacrificing thousands upon thousands of people, and they'd have these blades made from obsidian to cut the hearts out. And the obsidian blades are so ridiculously sharp. And they would just, within less than a minute, they would just pull someone's heart out. Hearts out. And they would dump your body. There was also mass cannibalism. There was a very demonic ritual that was done in pre-Christian Mexico where the high priest would take the skin of a human being and wear it. And then he would go into a dark room, and for days he would just sit in this dark room with the skin of a human being dressed on him, over him, like a blanket, like a cloak. And I'm thinking, this is Silence of the Lambs level stuff here. But it's at a systematic scale. And this is the empire, the Aztec Empire, and also the Mayan Empire, because the Mayans also did horrific things. These are the empires, the kingdoms, that people in Mexico glorified. Now, when I was living there, I saw it. The glorification of the Aztecs. Oh, la Azteca. They were so great. They were so amazing. They had a wonderful culture and civilization before the evil Spaniards showed up. And for all of you people out there who glorify the Aztecs, ask yourself this question. Why is it that when Hernan Cortez and his army of conquistadors arrived at the city of the Aztecs, I think it was called Tenochtitlan, why is it that when they arrived to the capital city of the Aztecs, that Cortez had an army of literally hundreds of thousands of indigenous warriors willing to fight for Cortez? Why? Because they were so sick and tired of having to pay taxes in human blood to the Aztecs. Imagine every so often, imagine every month or so, people just ride into your town and say, okay, give us human beings to be murdered. That's what it was like living under the Aztecs. I mean, we talk about the American Revolution under King George. Oh, we're not going to pay taxes to King George. I'd much rather pay taxes to King George than pay human beings to or to give human beings over to some Aztec lunatic so that I can avoid the wrath of the Aztec Empire. I would much rather pay King George than pay taxes in human blood to some demonic empire. But hundreds of thousands of indigenous men fought for Cortez against the Aztecs. If the Azteca was so great, if it was so amazing, then why did hundreds of thousands of indigenous people fight under Cortez? I thought Cortez was the worst human being. I thought he was so evil, so racist. Oh, he's part of the legacy of Christian white colonialism. But the indigenous people who were living under the Aztec Empire, they didn't mind. In fact, after the Aztecs were defeated, the king of Michoacan wanted to speak with Cortez. And so he invited Cortez. And Cortez met with the king of Michoacan. Michoacan, at one point in time, was the biggest enemy of the Aztecs. The Aztecs always tried to invade Michoacan. They always lost. And so the king of Michoacan says, I want to speak with Cortez. And so he invites Cortez, and Cortez arrives, and there's the king of Michoacan. And the king tells Cortez, I really, really like what you did. I'm really happy you defeated the Aztecs. They were evil barbarians. And the king of Michoacan says, you know what, Cortez? I'm giving you my kingdom. Take it. Here you go. And the Spanish took over Michoacan. And from what I understand, Michoacan was the state that absorbed Spanish culture more than any other region of Mexico. And I believe that because I went to Michoacan. That's where my mother is from, by the way. My mother is from Michoacan. I went to Michoacan. I stayed there for several weeks, and it was such a beautiful place. Now it's not as bad, not as great, but it was such a beautiful place, and it was very European. I mean, just very, like, I went to Morelia. I also went to Querétaro, and Querétaro is not in Michoacan. It's in a city. It's a city that's near Michoacan, but it's not Michoacan. But Querétaro is another very, very beautiful city. Very, very Spanish. When you go to Querétaro, you feel like you're in Madrid. And I had a similar feeling when I went to Morelia. I felt like I was in Madrid. I felt like I was in Spain. There's a lot of Spanish influence in the architecture in Michoacan, and it's quite a pleasant place. At least when I was there. Now it's different. But you can see it. And why did the indigenous people absorb European culture? Why? Because they were people who were indigenous who recognized the civility that the Spanish brought, and they recognized the civility of Christianity. And so the indigenous people were told, you don't have to be sacrificed for the gods, because God came in the flesh and he sacrificed himself for us. He's the ultimate sacrifice. There's no need for human sacrifice. And imagine how liberating that must have felt to hear that God has already done the sacrifice. There's no need for mass human sacrifice. There's no need for any of that evil. There's no need for any of this stuff. But when the Mesoamericans were under paganism, there was that evil. Cannibalism, mass murder, mass human sacrifice. Why? Because they were under a demonic religion. It was a satanic religion. And so what do you see in Mexico today? Glorification of this satanic kingdom called the Aztec kingdom, glorification of the Mayans, another diabolical kingdom. And so because they have that glorification, then they have paved a road that leads them to the mass murder that you see in Mexico today. And that's why you see these cults in the cartel world where they worship death, or they worship Satan, or they get involved in some witchcraft. They get involved in really voodoo, or they get involved in palamayombe type stuff. Really, really demonic stuff. Why is that? Because they have a glorification of a pagan culture. It's like if Germany glorified the Nazis. Imagine if after World War II, the Germans said, damn the Americans for invading us. The Nazi civilization was the greatest civilization ever, and we had such a wonderful civilization here until those damn Americans and those damn Russians and those damn British people ruined everything for us. And let's say that Germany just formed this cult of personality for the Nazis after World War II. And let's say you go to Germany today and they're still glorifying the Nazis. What would be the product of that? Guess what? More Nazism. It would just birth the very thing that the Nazis gave birth to. It would result in the very destructiveness that the Nazis gave birth to. The same rotten fruit, because it would be coming from the same root. It's like what Jesus said, you know them by their fruits. And so Jesus says, you know them by their fruits. Oh, an evil tree is going to produce rotten fruit. A good tree is going to produce good fruit. Why does Mexico have so much rotten fruit? It's because the root is evil. And the root is what? Paganism. That's the root. It's like, imagine it in a hypothetical situation, Germany still glorifying Hitler. What would be the result? Death. More Nazism. So what is the result of glorifying a mass murdering pagan empire? Guess what? More murder. And that's why you see death camps in Mexico. That's why. It's as simple as that. And that's it. Mexico is a very corrupt country. It's a very evil country. It is. It's a very evil country. And the problem with Mexican society is indifference. They don't care. They don't care. For the most part, people in Mexico don't care if somebody worships Santa Muerte. They don't care if someone worships Jesus Malverde. They don't give a damn. They don't care. So because of the indifference towards evil, you have evil. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that if you have a society that is indifferent towards evil, that society will be filled with evil? The byproduct of indifference towards evil is what? Evil. That's where evil is going to thrive. Anyway, I've talked long enough. You guys have just heard some theology. God bless.